Hey, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Greg Smith, Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Esports Trade Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Public Relations 101, the who, what, when, why, and how. Whether you're representing an esports organization, a growing brand, or an individual looking to sharpen your communication strategy, you're in the right place. Today's session is all about demystifying public relations, what it really is, what it isn't, and how it fits into your broader communication strategy. We're thrilled to be joined by a powerhouse panel from JSA and Partners, Jennifer Acree, founder and CEO, Casey Borisoff, Director of Public Relations, and Nick Moran, Manager of Public Relations. Together, they bring decades of experience helping brands, both big and small, find their voice, tell their story, and protect their reputation. And they tailored today's discussion specifically for professionals working in or around the esports industry. Now, before we get started, a quick reminder, if you have questions or comments during the presentation, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll be monitoring those throughout, and we'll make sure to address as many as we can during the Q&A at the end of the session. Again, we're excited to have you here. Thanks for being part of our community. And now let's get into it. So Jennifer, Casey, and Nick, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg. We appreciate the time, and thanks for everyone for joining today. I'm Jennifer Acree. I'm the founder of JSA and Partners. We are a boutique communications firm based in Los Angeles with offices across the country. We specialize in communication strategies and implementation for a range of industries, including AI, digital media, advertising, and we have a specialty practice in both esports and gaming. So we're excited to be here today.
Yeah, looking forward to chatting with you all. I'm Casey, director here at JSA and Partners. I oversee all things gaming and sports here at our firm.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick. I'm part of our Chicago team here at JSA and Partners. I'm a PR manager and I work with Casey and the rest of the team on our gaming esports client.
So I think the best way to always start these conversations is talking about what PR isn't. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there around what public relations is. So I'll just run through these. PR controls what journalists write. Not true. I would say another common misconception kind of in this vein is that reporters will send the articles for approval. Also never the case. That would be called an ad or sponsored content, which wouldn't be handled by a journalist. It would, or any editorial staff. PR pays for the article. We talked about that a little bit. Not exactly what happens. Also, another common misconception, PR results happen instantaneously. Well, there's obviously some exceptions to this when it comes to breaking news and things like that. Nope, not true. PR is really about the long game. It's about relationships building and establishing credibility. You can't really just become a thought leader overnight or get a story and a big headline in the New York Times. We've had clients that have had immediate success early on. The focus of PR really is a marathon, not a sprint. It really takes a while to build that credibility. Another common misconception, PR translates directly to sales. Not always the case. Most growth marketers use last click attribution for sales tracking. I want to call out that publications don't often link to the companies, let alone the products that are in the story. Their goal is to really keep readers on their website, so they often link to another story or something along those lines. You'll see PR translate to sales more in gift guide examples. So while we've seen that work, PR is first and foremost a brand awareness driver and thought leadership play, and it's about how you amplify the coverage on your own channels. PR is just about media coverage. I would say PR is about so much more than that. We help also with earned and owned content too. So what shows up on the blog, on LinkedIn, on things like that, and helping to frame all of that. There's also thought leadership, so going to conferences, submitting for awards, and everything like that. And the biggest kind of misconception I come across is that PR is only for large companies. That's absolutely not true. Startups, individuals, PR can be for anybody, honestly. It's just a matter of using it in the right way. So then we talked a lot about what PR isn't. So what is PR? I'll kick it over to Jen
Yeah.
to chat about what it is.
Yes. So PR provides the bridge between companies and the public. So think about it as a two-way mirror. We're not only looking for how the public perceives the company, but how the company interacts with the public. So whether it's a new product announcement or a CEO providing commentary on an industry topic, you and eventually your comms team want to work to ensure the consistency with what the company says publicly and its overall business goals. In other words, you could call it reputation management. If you care about how your brand and how you as the founder are perceived, then you need to loop in your comms person and make sure that you are all on the same page. It's not just about what execs speak to reporters. It's ensuring consistency with every touch point between the company and the public. And we're here to help guide and protect the reputation as communications professionals. But you can also take it one news cycle for things to go downhill. So you want to make sure that that's not going to happen. And so how do we prevent that? Those are the day-to-day strategies and tactics that we employ as communications people.
So we have a pretty wide range of tools in our toolbox as public relations professionals. And I think the bread and butter of this and a great place to start are media relations, which typically refers to any activity that involves interacting with the press in some capacity. Now, that's pretty broad, but in today's era, I think it's important to know that at the core of this, strong relationships with reporters, or at least the willingness to build those relationships, is ultimately key here. And keeping that top of mind is going to kind of underpin a lot of the success you'll have across your media relations. We've asked reporters, anecdotally, and there's also studies on this, that they receive between 150 and 700 email pitches each and every day. The number could be as high as 1,000 based off of certain reports. That's a baffling amount of emails. If you had that in your inbox, you'd probably have a heart attack. I know I would. And I think that depending on what they're covering and the scopes, that number fluctuates pretty broadly. To make your story stand out amongst those thousands or hundreds of emails that they may be getting, I think it's really important to land on like really killer, strong messaging that's going to stand out amongst the crowd, but also ladders up to an overall company goal. That being a top priority when you're developing like a messaging platform broadly. Then allow your comms people, your PR teams, to disseminate that message across company announcements, press releases, pitches, blog posts, and more. And then, as a result, we'll land you in the news with the stories that you want to see. It's also important that under the media relationships umbrella to consider coverage tracking. It's super, super important to understand where you're being mentioned, not only just in the news broadly, but against your competitors, because that's obviously going to drive kind of some of your business relations. And the insights that you have that come from really sharp, insightful PR tracking can actually inform the narratives and the talk tracks that you tell in the long term. So speaking of owning a talk track, thought leadership is something that has become a bit of a buzzword nowadays, but is definitely a core part of PR and a huge part of our toolkit moving forward. We aim to build thought leadership for a lot of our clients and the folks that we work with. And to distill it down kind of beyond the LinkedIn terminology here, thought leadership is essentially positioning executives and company spokespeople as go-to experts or authorities on the topics that matter most to them. This isn't the time to like jump on and shout from rooftops about your company, but rather to provide a really unique vantage point that cements your authority as an industry leader. So let's take the example from one of the clients that we work with, which is Exploding Kittens. It's a card and board game company, and their CEO Elon Lee, during his Masters of Scale and Tim Ferriss podcast, he's not jumping on that podcast saying, "Please, please buy my game." He's taking that opportunity to establish his thought leadership by saying how he's created his games, how he finds innovation at every corner. He's telling the secret sauce behind his strategy that only he can tell given his perspective and background, which will hopefully translate into interest, of course, in the company and his games, but not inherently. I think that's the real secret to thought leadership. The goal here is to be invited back for another interview. It's that you can consistently be recognized as, for your industry commentary, for conferences, bylines, op-eds, and more, using only the perspective that you have access to. Crisis comms, of course, is a key part of the work that we do. And one of the biggest keys to reputation management is how you show up in a crisis. There's a saying that reputation is gained in drops and lost in buckets. And in large part, especially in the game and esports space, I find that to be especially true. Well, obviously, we can't talk about the stuff that we've worked on based off of confidentiality and whatnot. The best examples of this playing out in public, in some cases, are celebrity drama. We think Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively dominating the news cycle this year have definitely been a really great case study on reputation and crisis comms. And when we deal with crisis or an issue, whether it be layoffs or product recalls or political issues, we're really aiming to manage the messaging and information coming from the company to protect the organization's reputation, not only in the immediate, but in the long term as well. Moving quickly internally here is really, really key, as is being in lockstep with the rest of your team and can, ensure you have consistent internal and external messaging. So if you have something coming down the pipe, this is my heads up to founders and startup leaders right now. Give your comms team the heads up sooner rather than later. Don't wait to loop them in. And finally, well, how did marketing get on this this presentation? We're gonna step in and say, nope, probably shouldn't be here. And Jen, I'll let you talk a little bit about the relationship between PR and marketing.
Yeah, exactly, Nick. To that point, PR does not equal marketing. They're very separate entities. They have different objectives, bring distinct benefits to the organization. Marketing's primary focus is on actively promoting and selling products and services. They're looking for direct ROI conversion and taking consumers down a marketing funnel, while as communications really on the crafting and maintaining a positive image for the organization or the brand within the media and the public's eye. So that said, they really need to work together. That's why we have that handshake right in the middle of the slide. They need to be aligned with each of what each other is saying. It's very important that there's consistent messages throughout what marketing's doing and what PR is doing. And we want to actually promote, PR can help promote what marketing is doing, and also marketing can help promote what PR is doing. So it definitely needs to be synergistic. And to do this, you need to have a consistent narrative. So you want to integrate your communications across different channels. So when we talk about some of these definitions, so earned is third-party coverage typically obtained through public relations efforts. So when you're reading an article in a newspaper or seeing a broadcast hit on TV. Earned also amplifies the brand's message and credibility at no cost. So there's not a cost associated with getting, obviously the cost of the communications person's salary or the firm's, budget, but there's no specific cost or trading hands between a journalist and a PR person. And then that's really the part where PR lies within this earned content. And then when we think about owned, it's really the channels that you own yourself. So that's your LinkedIn or your social strategies. It could be your blog or your own content, emails that you send out to customers, things like that. And then paid. So that's really where the marketing aspect comes in. So it looks for how you come up, you pay things in social for ads, search engines, websites, now geo, obviously. And they can help a brand reach their target audience, improve conversion rates, and maintain efficiency. Again, PR is not paid, but they need to be working together. And let's just say you're a dog food brand. Your blog content can't be about cat food recipes while your paid media is trying to sell dog food on Instagram and your CEO is talking about how much he loves his bunny. Instead, he needs to be cohesive and integrated together. So earned, owned, and paid all need to be hand in hand.
And then this is just a bit more context on some of the stuff we already talked about, just earned being third-party coverage. That's really where PR comes in. It's completely separate from paid media, such as advertising. Owned is really about the different blogs or LinkedIn content that you are posting to and where you really control that message. And then paid that we talked about is PR is not paid. And that's where a lot of marketing efforts fall. But again, we're synergistically, we can work together.
So we've talked a lot about what PR is and how it looks. But the big question now is who? who needs PR? So rather than tell you that you need PR at a certain stage in your company, I think it's easier to walk through the different types of personas and roles that might most benefit PR from PR kind of across the gamut of your company, because we found that it's beneficial to some early stage startup, it's beneficial to Fortune 500s, and especially and ultimately when you have the right thing to say. So you might identify with one or multiple of these folks. First and foremost is our buddy founder, Fred. He's got news, which could be funding, it could be new products, it could be a significant partner announcement. He's kind of moving business to and fro. And since he has an interesting background, maybe he's a serial entrepreneur, he's came from a high profile Fortune 500, he's got this really unique vantage point that he leans into when he's discussing his expertise. And finally, for him, PR isn't really just about the announcement. It's about building thought leadership and credibility that he can convert and use to influence future investors, customers, or maybe even partners. Marketing Mel is up next. She's your growth and marketing person with a creative brain, and she needs to sell that new product. Ultimately, PR is one way that she can drive conversations and awareness kind of beyond the toolkit that she has in traditional marketing. And it's a way of getting product into the hands of reporters, analysts, tastemakers, and even more. I think especially nowadays, there's some overlap between PR and marketing, or Marketing Mel here, as we look towards journalists and creators, and that line continues to blur. Think of, creators that are reporting news or journalists that have kind of social footprints. This is definitely one area that PR and Marketing Mel definitely get along. And then finally, she not only needs to launch a product, but she also needs to sustain sales year round. And this is part of that thing that Jen said earlier, that PR is definitely not a light switch. It's something you have to maintain momentum on. This is particularly relevant for folks like Marketing Mel. Reputation Rebecca. This goes back to some of our reputation management conversation here, but her goal is to protect the company and the company's reputation at all costs. So she's leaning on her comms team to maintain both employees and public trust in times of turmoil, but also in times of peace. She also might be preparing for a crisis, or she's already in one. Again, this is your second reminder of the session to keep your PR team in loop of potential crises. And finally, Expert Evan. Expert Evan is trying to build his thought leadership profile through speaking, events, awards, and conferences. Maybe ahead of taking over, his family's personal enterprise. Mm-hmm. You guys probably have an Expert Evan on your LinkedIn feeds right now, especially if you're tuning in from there. He might just try and be ultimately the go-to guy in his field and wants that level of clout and authority tied to his name. I think particularly relevant with Expert Evan is he has the data and expert POV to back up that level of thought leadership. He's a newsmaker, and he pushes the industry forward with his commentary, and it looks to kind of be really relevant in the trends and topics of the day. Now, looking at this group of folks together, whether you're founder Fred, you're a Marketing Mel, you're a Reputation Rebecca, an Expert Evan, or something in between, you're able to choose different aspects from all these, especially with smaller teams. One thing that's clear is that each person needs and gets something different out of PR, but ultimately having the right message for the right audience is core to finding success. And speaking of success, we're not math people here at JSA, but we can work on a very simple equation. Brand awareness plus reputation management equals success. And let's break that down for a second. With brand awareness, we're going to increase your visibility, your positive association, as well as expand your reach. Reputation management is about combating negative sentiment, building trust, and establishing and maintaining credibility. And finally, with that equals success, especially from a PR perspective. Now, how do we know that we found success, and what does that look like? Well, there's two kind of key buckets, quantitative and qualitative, you may have heard. And I think that with PR, there's a lot of nuance here, but with a very general look at this conversation, quantitative looks at impressions, share of voice amongst competitors and other metrics like message pull through. Whereas qualitative is more about the abstract business impact, sentiment analysis, how your message is resonating with your audience, the quality of coverage. I think one thing that's really top of mind for us in the PR landscape right now is putting numbers to some of these more abstract PR KPIs. It's something that us and a lot of other firms are looking really close to that, is how can we really quantify the business impact of the work that we do, which feels really abstract and qualitative sometimes. That's a conversation that's actively ongoing, and I think that's something that's really near and dear to our hearts, but that could be another ESTA session in the future as well too. So we'll spare you that right now.
So let's take a quick look at now what a successful announcement can actually look like. I know we've talked a lot about different things in PR and kind of what these mean, but I think it's helpful to kind of break down what a particular announcement, a successful campaign can look like. So let's say this is an example of something we might do for a new product for a gaming company that's maybe looking to raise later this summer or wants to reach an investor audience. So we're going to go to the publications that the investors read. That could be TechCrunch, Axios, Fortune, and generally those newsletters are great places to get their eyes on. In our storytelling, we really want to emphasize things like, why is this team the right one to bring the product to market? What's their background? What is the technology? What is the differentiators of the technology? And why did they create it? And any investor wants to know product market fit. So we also need to demonstrate how they're already gaining traction with beta customers. To reach these goals, we really want to start outreach way early, at least a week and a half in advance. As Nick alluded to before, reporters' inboxes are crowded. It's not an instant win. So we have to kind of build that narrative and think about it from a long-term play. Then we'll conduct interviews with the founder, right? Maybe do a product demo or something like that, depending on what it is. And it's especially important. This is especially important because we want to include a quote from that, or potentially an interview from a partner or previous investor or something like that as well. On the day of announcement, then, like, our work doesn't stop. It's really about then conducting day of outreach to a wider net of reporters. And seeing where those hits are in the TechCrunches, the Verges, the Axioses, Fortune newsletter, and so on and so forth, where investors are reading. And then, as Nick mentioned, we'll package that up, right, and talk about what was the success, break it down, postmortem, like what could we do differently next time, and so on and so forth. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a glimpse into what makes a successful announcement.
Thanks, Casey. And with that, we have a lot of gaming and esports fans here in the audience. You've completed your tutorial, and now you're kind of off into the open world here. And we're going to hone in specifically on the world of gaming and esports for the latter half of this presentation, because as we understand, each industry has its own level of nuance that you need to adjust and accommodate for. PR isn't the same across every industry, and gaming and esports, we feel like, is a particularly unique space to operate communications in. Let's see what gaming and esports media looks like. Well, broadly speaking, 15,000 reporters were laid off last year across all scopes, but in particular, gaming and esports took a significant portion of that hit. We saw outlets like Esports Illustrated, Kotaku, GG Recon either reducing staff or shutting down entirely. So it's important to understand that in addition to reporters receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of emails a day, particularly within gaming and esports, information overload is incredibly relevant. And over the past 5 years alone, we've seen layoffs across both traditional news that covers gaming and esports, as well as gaming and esports endemic outlets as well. So if you're looking at the trajectory of what the landscape looks like, and like kind of what we're working with here, is you're seeing kind of widespread consolidation and fewer reporters being required to do more work. Now, there's also a conversation here that continues to be ongoing around SEO and Google's changes to search results. With the rise of AI, there's less incentive to click on articles and stay on pages and outlets. And so there's a larger emphasis on things like, not to use the word clickbait, but opportunities for folks to click on an article and stay on that web page. That's really what reporters in gaming and esports in particular are looking for right now, as their kind of backs are against the wall under the pressure of these different SEO changes right now. Now, looking specifically at esports media, they are fundamentally different from games media. You may be reading gaming news in outlets like IGN, GameSpot, and more, but esports media is a little bit more different, and they're specialized. They're a targeted audience of fans and leaders. And within this audience in particular, we've recognized that controversies perpetuate quickly, and reporters may publish articles without full understanding of the facts. They may cover news in real time. It moves incredibly quickly. And news and esports is kind of straddled between two different buckets of outlets. There are consumer outlets, which exist in service of esports fans. Think Esports GG, .esports, and more. And then business outlets like GamesBeat and more that kind of cover the industry from a top-down business or financial perspective. While they both cover esports, they serve two radically different audiences. Your consumer outlets are serving these diehard fans that want features on players and score updates and event news, while your business audience is looking for partnerships, executive transactions, and more. As I mentioned, this landscape is radically changing, and esports media is incredibly fragmented. As a part of these consolidations and reductions, reporters are kind of reducing their tenures at outlets, they're freelancing more, they're jumping across publications. It's difficult. It's a difficult time to be a reporter in esports media right now. And from a PR perspective, this makes it really difficult to form reliable context at these outlets. However, how we're adjusting for that is building long-standing relationships with those reporters so that as they kind of move across outlets, you pay dividends not only at the first outlet that you build that relationship at, but as they kind of continue to bounce around the space or freelance across a whole gamut of different outlets. And finally, tightening budgets are really, really relevant. In most cases, especially amongst medium and small esports publications, reporters are asked to pay for their own travel or accommodations unless it's being offered to them by a brand or another means, meaning that it's really difficult to draw in-person attendance at live events. We're actually seeing the amount of media attending these live events kind of reduced due to these constraints and budgets. It's not, extinct at this point, or it's not unheard of, but it is definitely becoming more and more difficult to have that in-person presence because a lot of outlets feel that they can justify remote coverage at this point in time. And finally, I think the last bucket in terms of what makes esports media so unique is the way that they value transparency. I think that this is especially because esports is still relatively a really young space, that reporters are often used to networking directly with esports organizations like coaches, players, sending Twitter DMs to break news and get the scoop on stories. Players and organizations aren't afraid to also, similarly vocalize their discontent with leagues or publishers on platforms like social media. There have definitely been times that, on stream or in comments or on social media that a player will speak out, especially because to, be very real with everyone, that we live in a space where you have a top competitor who's maybe 16 years old and media training isn't at the top of their priority. So keeping in mind that the space is volatile, but also it rewards coverage that favors players and exacerbates community conversations and criticism. We've seen in our work that a lot of commentary, especially during times of crisis, will put a spotlight on the voice raising the concern, community sentiment kind of pushing back against a certain concern, and that is in particular perpetuated in esports media compared to other types of media that we operate in. And finally, I think the last thing to keep in mind, especially if you're working with a brand or publisher, is that esports media generally, and this isn't the case all the time, but generally have a critical view of publishers and are not afraid to ask tough questions and hold them accountable. I think that as we see kind of across the gaming landscape broadly, gamers are a critical and skeptical audience. They are really quick to love the brands that they love and support, but also really quick to judge, especially when the status quo has been tampered with. And esports media, as an extension of that, aren't afraid to ask a tough question and hold publishers and other leaders accountable.
So I know we threw a lot at you here, but I think if there's really three things to take away from this conversation, the first is that your earned, owned, and paid channels really need to be working in unison to create that same cohesive narrative. Like Jen spoke about, you can't be talking about dog food, cat toys, and bunnies in one situation. You have to make sure it's all about dog food. And then the second is there are multiple facets to comms. It's not just about the press release that goes up on the wire. It's about media relations. It's about thought leadership. It's about maintaining your reputation through excellent crisis comms. And third, it's not about what stage your company is in. It's really, at the end of the day, about what you have to say. If you have a compelling narrative, then PR can be really helpful to getting that out there and across through all of these different methods and channels that we talked about today. So with that, that is your crash course in PR, and we are happy to take any questions that you have. We'll also have a workshop, I believe, next week as well, where we can really deep dive, hone in on any pressing questions, any things that you're working on, but we'll take this time to answer any questions that you all have.
Thanks, Jennifer, Casey, and Nick. It was very interesting and very informative. I can tell from some of the questions that we got that other people feel the same way. So let's kind of start with one of the harder hitting ones. Nick, kind of talked a few times about getting PR folks into the mix sooner rather than later. Given how quickly controversies and things can spread within gaming and esports communities, what would you say is kind of a crisis response protocol timeline
That's
that
a
people can kind of consider?
That's a great question, Greg. I'm happy to kick it off here and pass it over to Jen and Casey. But I think that as someone, and I'm speaking personally here, that has kind of grown up and lived in the gaming esports space a lot of my life, I think that you can see, even as a spectator, that to your point, yes, crisis does perpetuate and can spread really quickly, especially in the digital age that we live in. All it takes is a tweet, a Reddit thread, and more to really kick off a really difficult conversation. And in many cases, the impacted party may not be privy to that ahead of time. So I think in terms of the timeline here, being really quick and agile is incredibly important, but not at the detriment of gathering facts, understanding the situation, and aligning with key stakeholders internally. I think that in particular, audiences, as we discussed in esports and gaming, are critical and they're skeptical. And to manage that reputation, you kind of have one shot to make right by them in terms of crisis. And so having a really kind of buttoned up and tactical approach is super, super key. But Jen, Casey, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd also add that it's what we do for a lot of clients, and especially in the, as Nick said, in the gaming and esports space, because there can be a lot of crises that just sort of pop up, is that you need a framework. So have a playbook, like a crisis playbook, so that it has the who, what, when, where, why, and who needs to be involved, kind of outline different scenarios so that you have a playbook for when a crisis arrives. You're not completely starting from scratch. Obviously, every situation is going to be a little different. So it's not like you can have the messaging completely done ahead of time, but whatever facet of the esports industry you're in, you probably can anticipate some of the things that might happen. Mm-hmm. So if you can get almost, halfway or 3/4 of the way done, or at least know what players need to be involved, and have everyone's, cell phone or, Discord or whatever ready to go, that can get you really, get a head start when something goes down.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to remember here too is that not all crises necessarily rise to the level of a response, right?
Great point.
I think that you have to really and that's where Nick talked about, gather the facts and think about kind of the context of what your company will typically speak to or not, and have those kind of boundaries set in place. And then you can evaluate, is this something that warrants our attention? Is this something that, maybe it doesn't, or something like that. So that's another great thing to align on with your comms team in advance, so you know how you want to proceed right off the bat. And that helps with being quick as well.
And then monitoring the situation too.
Yeah.
Sometimes, we will wait and watch to see how the sentiment evolves. Is it just, a thing on X and then it quickly goes away and gets buried, or, or is it something that continually keeps coming up that that you need to address?
Nice. Well, thank you for the insight into that. I know that was not an easy question, and obviously differs based on what the crisis is. Yep. This next question is kind of also a little large, but hopefully you can kind of shed some light on it. Someone wants to know, what's a realistic PR budget for a small to medium-sized organization, and how should it be allocated across different activities?
Yeah, I think it's really on a case-by-case basis. If you have a super small budget, sometimes it's easier or better to go with a consultant, or a single practitioner that doesn't have a firm. What you do miss in that is sort of the collective brain power and contacts of an agency. We have large clients, big multinational companies that we work with that obviously we do more for them, so the budgets are bigger. But a lot of companies like us do have a smaller program for startup type things that can often start at $5,000 a month, and it really just depends on what the objectives are and what are the things that you're really looking to achieve. We sometimes get work with people, they don't even have announcements. It's really about building their thought leadership. How do we get them out there with events and speaking and trend jacking and things like that, as opposed to, a series of announcements. But sometimes, what we try to do is work with people on what their objectives are, and then really customizing a plan that, you can be agile and adapt month over month as things change, but having sort of this framework in place of what the objectives are so that you can decide which tactics are mostly going to help you reach those goals.
Yeah. I would say that's the kind of key to this, really, is aligning with your business objectives and making sure you're working with a partner that's in tune with those, because those are fluid, those change, and, might differ as the company kind of finds its positioning in the market and so on and so forth. So I think working with a firm that's adaptable and can adjust based on what those are is really important to look for, and making sure that they're a strategic partner when it comes to that.
Cool. This next question actually kind of dovetails off of what you just mentioned, Jennifer. But somebody wants to know, how do you determine the right PR timing for your organization? Should they wait until they have major news, or should they start building those relationships early?
It's a hard question just to give a blanket response. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have a moment in time that you're using as a launch pad, sort of to, introduce your company, whether that's a funding announcement or, you're launching a product or things like that. I think hopefully when you're working with PR people, they're, honest and smart enough to tell you sort of when the right time is and can give you that advice. We're also here if people have questions, we're happy to individually answer. And I think we're going to, in that workshop next week, be able to address some of those specific questions. But it is nice to have news if you have it as a way to, and it's sort of, an excuse to introduce the company to select journalists.
Yeah. And I think to that point, like we talked about before, PR isn't really something you can just turn on. So I do think it's important to engage an agency ahead, a month or two ahead of when you're trying to announce something, because I think for us, the most important thing is laying a really strong foundation. So getting in place the messaging, the FAQs, really understanding what do you want out there circulating about the company.
Media training, if you need it.
All of that beforehand. So giving yourself plenty of time to make sure your agency can prepare all of that is really important.
Yeah, and I think that the last thing I tack on to that too, and I'm totally in alignment with Casey and Jen here, is that also think about what the next step is too, whether it be kicking off PR in the long term or tying it to an announcement, what comes after that. I think, as folks largely who work in gaming and esports, you see how fastly the news cycle moves, and it feels like there could be breaking news one week and next week is kind of totally in our rearview mirror. And so not only is it gearing up for when the right moment to start is, but how do you maintain that momentum moving forward too? And so if it's just one beat and there's nothing else to say, then maybe that's a little bit of a different situation from having a major news beat or launch and continuing that conversation long term. And again, that's a conversation, to Jen Casey's point, having with a really honest, tapped in PR firm is really, really helpful in determining.
Great. And then it looks like our last question here. Somebody wanted to know, how do you approach PR differently for B2B versus B2C within esports?
Want to take one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's two very different approaches, right? When you're looking at B2B, again, I think it's really, it's one of these is hard to answer with kind of a blanket question, but I think if you're trying to reach partners, right, it's looking at the advertising publications, whether that's Marketing Dive, Adweek, Ad Age, and those sorts of publications, that's one thing. And you're speaking to a very different audience, obviously, than you would as a consumer, right? Where you're trying to drive maybe viewership or engagement with your game, or drive downloads for a new product or software that you're launching, and so on and so forth. And, for that one, deciding, are you really looking to reach a general consumer audience? Are you looking for the BuzzFeeds of the world and that sort of persona? Or are you trying to reach a really specific targeted audience of hardcore gamers? Maybe you look at the
brands.
esports GGs. Yeah. So It's hard. Again, that's one that's hard to answer with a blanket statement. And it comes down to really just aligning on those strategic objectives and figuring out like what's right for your brand, right?
And we often have multiple audiences. So you
True.
might be trying to reach consumers with one part of your product, but you're trying to reach, brands or advertisers, in a different part. So it doesn't also have to be mutually exclusive.
Great. Well, thank you for all your time today, for sharing your insights. Like you said, we have the workshop next week, so we'll be emailing everybody that indicated that they would like to take part in that. So that'll be a more intimate face-to-face setting, virtually, obviously. I say face-to-face. So until then, hope everyone takes care, and thanks again for tuning in.
Yeah, and I would just say a special shout out to our Substack. It's a free Substack. We have some great content in there. We just did a whole deep dive. We do it once a month, and then we do a TLDR version, mid-month, where we kind of analyze an issue or something that happened. We did, the Cracker Barrel debacle, kind of debriefed on that. We just did a whole piece on geo. And then we also do a lot of Q&As with journalists. So relevant to this group is that we just interviewed Dean Takahashi from GameSpeed about the new independent company of GameSpeed. So definitely worth a read and a subscription, free subscription, if you want to follow along with our take on what's going on in the industry.
Cool. I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Greg.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for this informative webinar. Have a nice day.
You too.
Great. Thank you.